What do we make of this statement from President Obama? Should we just stick to the Sermon on the Mount, a passage that is so radical that it's doubtful that our own Defense Department would survive its application? So before we get carried away, let's read our Bibles. Folks haven't been reading their Bibles. Barack Obama has ventured into the realm of biblical politics, and he encourages us to read our Bibles, and for this I am thankful. But I think he needs to take a closer look at what the Bible has to say about particular issues. And in the previous show, I made mention of things related to slavery, eating unclean foodstuffs, and so forth. And in this particular case, Barack Obama says, look, show you how impractical it is to use the Bible in terms of contemporary politics and governing. He just doesn't really understand the Bible. He goes to the Sermon on the Mount. He said, look, if we followed the Sermon on the Mount, we couldn't have a defense department. And the problem with that type of statement is he misunderstands that the Sermon on the Mount isn't directed to the Defense Department. It isn't dealing with civil government. It is dealing with personal relationships. It's very clear about this. In fact, it's so clear that to read the Sermon on the Mount and to come to no other conclusion, one has to misrepresent it on purpose or just to be ignorant of what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. Let me give you an example of this. If you look at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 38, it says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist him who is evil, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your coat or your shirt, let him have your coat also. And whoever shall force you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And it goes on here. Now this is obviously a description of what we as individuals should do. Since the Bible gives directives to the civil magistrate, in Romans 13 we're told very clearly that the civil magistrate has the power of the sword, and the civil magistrate can use the sword to the point of even executing people. There were capital crimes in the Old Testament. It's very clear on this. But in interpersonal relationships, we can't use the sword in our relationships. So when someone slaps you, you walk away from it. But of course, if someone is about to hit you with a baseball bat, you can defend yourself. It's very legitimate to do so. So to look at the Sermon on the Mount and kind of dismiss it, to say, oh, our Defense Department couldn't use this. Well, the Defense Department isn't supposed to use this passage. You couldn't defend yourself against an enemy using the Sermon on the Mount as it is a directive for individual relationships. Remember, it's a slap across the face. It's not somebody pulling a knife or pulling a gun on you. It's obviously something you can walk away from. But if someone is about to break into your house or to beat or rape your wife, you have all of the freedom in Scripture in order to defend yourself and to defend your family against somebody who is an aggressor. Now, it's interesting that Jesus has this particular verse in verse 38 of Matthew chapter 5. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And Jesus is actually quoting Exodus chapter 21. And so if you look at Exodus 21, you'll see something very interesting. And of course, what the scribes and Pharisees were doing was taking Bible verses out of context, taking bits and pieces of passages and reformulating them to fit their own preconceived conceptions on how we ought to live our lives. Satan did the same thing in the temptation in the wilderness in Matthew chapter 4 and Luke chapter 4. Took pieces of the Bible and then reformulated in order for them to fit a particular, his particular worldview to try to entrap Jesus. But of course, Jesus knew the whole Bible and knew the context of all these verses. And I've used this one before, that you can make the Bible say anything by stringing a whole series of verses together. Judas went out and hanged himself. Go thou and do likewise. Whatever thou doest, do quickly, because there is no God. Now, these are 4 legitimate Bible passages, and they have legitimacy within the context in which they were given. But taking them out of their context, clipping them, and then putting them together to create a new context is something that is contrary to any type of literature. But Jesus sees this clipping taking place from Exodus chapter 21, beginning with verse 22. This is the famous passage dealing with a woman who is struck. There are 2 men who are fighting, which they should not have been fighting. Again, we're back to this passage regarding turn the other cheek. These 2 men are fighting. There's a pregnant woman nearby. These 2 men struggle. They hit this woman. This woman goes into premature labor, and she delivers her children. The literal interpretation is so that her children come out. But notice how this runs, and notice who's supposed to make this determination. In verse 22 of Exodus chapter 21, and if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she has a miscarriage, the better translation is so that her children come out, yet there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judges decide. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. And so this particular law, what was happening is that the scribes and Pharisees were taking this law that was designed for a judicial setting, for civil government, and they were taking it and they were applying it in interpersonal relationships. Jesus sets them straight. He says, in terms of these types of relationships, turn the other cheek, walk away. Someone steals a cloak from you, give their shirt, give them your cloak as well. This may actually be instructions given concerning an occupation. There are times to fight. There are other times, look, just give in to it all. It's not a big deal. But what was happening is the scribes and Pharisees were taking these laws that were designed for the civil magistrate, and they were trying to apply them in a personal setting. This is what happens in Islamic countries today. These vendettas and so forth, and killing your daughter because of being raped by somebody else. They took it outside the court. If you read the first few pages of The Godfather by Mario Puzo, this funeral director, this undertaker, comes in and he wants Vito Corleone to give him justice. And so he's taken it outside the realm of a legitimate court, and he wants justice, he wants vindication with something that is illegitimate. It is wrong for us to take these laws that are meant for the civil court and apply them to interpersonal relationships, just as it is wrong to take laws that are meant to be applied for interpersonal relationships and apply them to the civil magistrate. This is why we have in the Bible laws governing the individual and self-government, laws governing the family and family government, laws governing the church and church government, and laws governing the state and civil government. And I outline this in my 3-volume series, God and Government. So Barack Obama admonition here, folks haven't been reading their Bibles, and he gives the instruction, let's read our Bibles. And I would say to him, yes, I agree, and we might want to start with the President of the United States.
American Vision is proud to present this year's Worldview Super Conference, July 21st through 24th at North Metro Church, Marietta, Georgia. For more information, visit conference.americanvision.org. That's conference.americanvision.org.